Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be talking about block offs, and I'm not going to do a tutorial on my builds, but you will see some builds which will be used as examples in this video, right? And overall, I really wanted to send out this message, especially for people who still enjoy building, right? And they love being creative with their builds, right? But I want to send out this message because it is very crucial information, and I think a lot of you should know about. All right. So before we get into exactly explaining block offs and all that, right? I'm going to show you exactly what was the inspiration of this video while I was sick. Because when I was sick, I was in a lot of pain, and I'm still a little bit sick, but I'm feeling a lot better. But overall, I had this thought, right? And mathematically, it shouldn't make sense, but it just works out like this, right? So what do I mean by this? So here is my little geyser thing, right? So I think some of you already know that you can path them to the geyser. They could go wee. All right. Okay, so now we need to have appropriate block offs, right? And including this area over here. All right, so this part would have a certain amount of block off, and this part would have a certain amount of block off, and then the husks would path over here and go over there. And then initially we would think that they would path from here, 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 all the way here. To make sure that they path this one extra tile, you need to make sure there's enough block off here. Right, so the amount of block off I have here is just enough, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4 of a full block off, right? And then there's that little half piece over here. So this half piece is actually not used as a block off. I'm only using it as for distance, so that they're better getting into the geyser, right? But I actually don't need this here in order to path them in there. All right. So before what I had was something like this, where I had a half floor over there. Whoops, half floor over there. I had a half floor here. Be patient with me, all right? So this is going to be very useful for all builders of every level. And over here, right? So this is what I had initially, where I had 3 half floors and 3 full layers, right? And 3 full layers, 3 half floors. And I'm like, that's got to be enough. Like, it should be. But it turns out this wasn't enough. This was not enough, and of course these are all tier 3, right? I need to, because upgrading is slow. So this was not enough layers to turn all the husks away from here. So there would either be a smasher that would hit this, or there would be a propane tank that may occasionally blow up. It's not always happened, but it was a low probability of happening. If it was a low probability, that means it can't happen. So I don't want that to happen. I want a zero probability, right? So if this doesn't work, then but however, I know for sure that this would be enough layers if I do this, right? If I put this over here, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 4 full layers and 0 half layers versus 3 full layers and 3 half layers. And it's like, that must mean that a half layer is 25% of a full, or at least it has to be a minimum of 25, right? So if it takes 4 half layers to make up a full wall, then that's actually kind of mind-boggling. And why is it mind-boggling is that, look at the health on this. So this is 6.5 thousand, this is 9.8 thousand. So this is actually like 67 or 66% of a full wall in terms of health, right? So you would think that if you have 2 of these, right? If you had 2 of these, then of course it would make up more than a full wall. But it turns out, no, you actually need 4 of these to make up a full wall in terms of block off. In terms of a health, if they're beating on the wall, then yes, of course. But we're not talking about health. We're just talking about them pathing away, right? So if you have to path them away, the total amount of health actually doesn't matter at all. What really matters is your layering and how you're doing the layering, right? So this is kind of a big shock to me. So what I ended up doing is I was like, all right, if this is true, that means pretty much all the builds that I've been doing, or all the builds that everybody has been doing for Twine Endurance using these half floors, are completely pointless and a waste of structures. And I'm like, alright, so if that's true, then let's test it out. I rebuild like my entire Twine Endurance to remove all half floors. So there's half floors here, half except for Devil North. Devil North, I'll keep them. I need them there. But yeah, I pretty much removed it for almost every build except for maybe Double West, because I need it for loud bomb shifts. So I still need it for loud bomb shifts, but overall I removed these half floor layers from my base, and it turns out, yep, they still work. And these half floor layers are literally probably 25%. And it's a big shock to me, which is only about 25% of a full wall. So if that's the case, then that saves me tons and tons of structures, and I can build like whatever I want, right? And if I can build whatever I want, then I think everybody else can build whatever they want. They don't have to complain about, oh, I'm running out of structures. I'm like, well, try this. Remove all your half floor layers and use full layers. Okay? So, with that in mind, I think I wanted to do a video on this, right? And this is where the video is being introduced now, right? So, hey everybody. And this is going to be talking about block-offs in general, alright? So I give you a little bit of a preview exactly what I'm going to talk about, but it's going to be a short explanation. Okay, so bear with me. I just wanted to tell you that story. Okay, so let's start off with the Valley Amplifier. Okay, if you're curious about, by the way, if you're curious about my big builds and Twine Endurance and stuff like that, or currently, I am not posting like a very full detailed guide on each amplifier yet, and the reason being is because the upcoming meta changes, I have no idea what they're going to be. We could have like flingers throwing propane tanks for all we know, right? Or we have propane tanks blown up exactly 1 minute no matter what, and it's like, well, this build's kind of pointless then, right? So we just don't have to wait until see what the meta changes are going to be. Okay, so for now, just be patient. Let's wait for the meta changes. But for now, I'm going to talk about block-offs and worry about my builds later. Okay. So overall, if you have the husk pathing, so let's say the pathing over here, yada yada yada, right? My Valley Amplifier, and then there's a straight pathway over here. Okay. So this is like where the husk would want to path naturally, right? If you left this kind of open, they would path naturally straight ahead to the amplifier, right? Now, if we blocked it off, right? If we want to path them one tile more west, right? Now, for non-nature smashers, all you have to do is add 4 layers. Right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, right? You have 4 layers here, and then the husk would path all the way around, right? That's all you need, 4 layers. And you don't need more than that, unless it's a nature smasher. If it's a nature smasher, then you would do that 1 extra step and put 1 extra tile, right? So for nature smasher, you need 5, but everything else, you're going to need 4, and that's perfectly fine, okay? Now, if this was going to be pathing them 2 tiles away from the amplifier, so instead of just over here, we're going to path them 2 tiles here, right? In that case, you're going to need 7. So it goes from 4 to 7, right? Excuse me. 3, oops, alright. 3 and 4. 5 and then 6, 7. 7 layers, and this would be enough to path all the husks all the way into here. Excuse me. Okay, and if this was nature smashers, right? If this was nature smashers, you can need 1 extra layer. Unfortunately, if I connect this over here, this is going to connect to the amplifier, and this causes some bugs. So what I'm going to do instead is that I'm going to make up that 1 extra layer using half floors if there was nature smashers. So I'm going to need 4. No, I need 4 to make up 1. So there's 2, 3, and 4. And then now this would make up that 1 extra layer, and this will be enough for the nature smashers. And of course I have to do it in here as well, right? Okay. And of course you can close this off if you want to put traps on there. stuff like that. And this would be enough to detour them away, right? And from my testing, these do not require additional layering to factor in. So this doesn't make it like a half tile longer, from my understanding. So these are perfectly fine to put, right? And they shouldn't want to break your walls, because this makes the pathing longer. So these things are like an exception to like your pathing, right? But I generally leave it like here, right? And that's fine. Okay, so this will be enough for Nature Smashers 8 of them, right? So if you probably think that maybe there's a pattern, well, there is. So for non-Nature Smashers, 1 tile away, 4 layers, 2 tiles away, 7 layers, 3 tiles away, 10 layers, 4 tiles away, 13 layers, and so on and so on. So it keeps adding 3 every time, with the initial being 4, right? Excuse me. Now, if it was a Nature Smashers, it would start at 5 with 1 tile away, and then 2 tiles away would be 8, 3 tiles away would be 11, and then 4 tiles away would be 14, etc. So the Nature Smashers only require 1 additional tile. And keep in mind that this is going to be all tier 3 metal, right? So all the layers over here that I'm talking about are going to be just tier 3 metal exclusively. And yes, on nature waves, it is better to use metal for block off. If you're talking about an effective health pool, right? If you're talking about effective health pool, then yes, brick would be better to use than nature, right? So, but for block offs in particular, they follow a completely different set of rules that are not associated with health. Alright, so I want you guys to keep that in mind, that block offs are completely different from health. Do not associate a block off with health. Think of block offs as more of geometry, right? You're trying to figure out the friggin' geometry problem, right? You're not trying to figure out the health problem. You're trying to figure out a geometry problem, okay? You gotta make sure you keep that difference there, okay? And but yeah, that is pretty much what I wanted to show overall in terms of how these block offs are going to be, right? And another thing to keep in mind, to make sure that there's strategies to make sure that you don't need as much block off. You can make the husk path shorter distances, right? So if you can make the pathway shorter for the husk, you don't require as much block off, right? So one example of that, right, is my geyser build over here. Now notice over here that I don't have a straight wall over here, right? I don't have a wall over here. And the reason being is because it actually makes the pathway longer, because they have the path over here, then over here. So instead, you use a diagonal pathway. If the pathway is diagonal, then it's a shorter pathway, right? And requires less block off, right? And same thing over here, I used a diagonal pathway for the husk, right? So up here, I made a recycler build over here, which is really happy and fancy and dangly, but ignoring that, essentially there's a path them over here, and then from here I want to path them as straight as I can to the amplifier. And thinking, how do I do that? Diagonally as you can, right? So this is as diagonally as I can go, right over here, right over here, right over here, right over here, right? And the pathway starts on this tile over here. Ignore this. This doesn't actually make the pathway longer for the husk, right? So keep in mind again, these half little thingy-bobs over here, these half little walls don't actually make the pathway longer for the husk in terms of their block off, right? So we're actually going to be starting from here, and it's going to be pathing diagonally over here in terms of the husk pathing, and then down here, right? So this is as diagonal as I can get them to the amplifier, right? Yes. So make sure that you can path them as short as path as you can for your block offs, and make sure that your block offs are efficient, right? So again, none of my block offs gonna have half floors in them. They've all been removed, right? With the exception of this one for the loud bomb shift, right? But yeah, I think that's it overall for this video. I didn't want to make it too long. I just want to give you this short, simple, sweet message that, hey, there's a ways to get your block costs really efficient, save you lots of structures, and yeah, I hope you just overall had an understanding of how these block offs work. Alright, so thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you learned something from it. Okay, and see you next time, alright?